Hi guys, this is Audiobook. This story does not belong to me, it is written by Goldenlineage. If you want to support him, please visit him on Webnovel. Though Audiobook is ours, and to support us, join our Discord and subscribe to this channel. And if you want some special request Audiobook, join our Patreon, it helps a lot. Thank you for your patience. Chapter 21. News about the game. When Adyr took off the game helmet, the soft glow of candlelight filled his vision. A quick glance at the clock confirmed it was already 8 p.m. He plugged the helmet in to charge, waiting for the power to return, then went through his usual workout routine and headed downstairs. The scene was familiar. In the softly lit living room, Moriel had returned from work and was resting on the couch, clearly exhausted. Neva sat at the table, buried in her books, quietly studying. Noticing her brother, Neva looked up and asked with a curious, slightly surprised tone, "You're still playing the game, brother?" "Yes," Adyr replied as he slowly took a seat. Her blue eyes widened, visibly lighting up. "Wow, you're so close to being famous then." Adyr chuckled. He knew what she meant. She'd probably been reading forums and posts about the game, about how low the survival rate was, and how few players were still active. Not wanting the conversation to go any deeper, he casually picked up one of the open books in front of her and began helping with her work. While the two siblings studied together, Moriel quietly approached. Placing a gentle hand on Neva's head, she asked with a warm smile, "How's it going, him?" The fatigue in Moriel's eyes was obvious. She clearly needed rest. But it was just as clear that she wanted to spend at least a little of her time with her children. Still, Adyr noticed something else. A subtle shift in her tone, a faint tension in her movements, signs of something more on her mind. He didn't press her, though. If she wanted to talk, she would. After a bit of light family conversation, Moriel finally said what had been weighing on her. "I'll be away for a few days. A week at most." Neva immediately turned her head, eyes wide with concern. "Why?" she asked, worry plain in her voice. Seeing her daughter's reaction, Moriel gently stroked her head again, trying to soothe her. "There's a village about a day outside the city walls. An informer told us there are children there in poor condition. We're going to check the situation, and if possible, bring those in need back to the city orphanage." A heavy silence settled over the room. Everyone knew what it meant to leave the city. The moment you stepped beyond the walls, the world changed. Unlike the structured safety of city life, what waited outside was chaos, filled with people who had nothing to lose, and nothing they wouldn't do to survive. Noticing the shift in mood, Moriel gave a quick smile, trying to ease the tension. "Come on now, no need to worry. It's not my first expedition, you know that. But the longest you've been gone was 2 days," Neva said immediately, her voice rising as her eyes began to well up. "And you never went this far." I know. But really, don't worry," Moriel said, her tone gentle. "Besides, STF will be escorting us. They'll make sure nothing goes wrong." It was clear she trusted them. After all, the STF, Superhuman Task Force, was the city's most capable and well-equipped force. "Still," Neva said, clearly unconvinced. Her eyes shifted to her brother, hoping he'd say something. But Adyr remained silent. He knew that no matter what he said, it wouldn't change anything. Moriel's sense of duty and her instinct to protect children ran too deep. Only one sentence felt right in that moment. "Just make sure you're careful." "Haha, I will, don't worry," Moriel said with a laugh as she pulled her son into a hug. She'd always known Adyr carried a quiet wisdom beyond his years, and once again, he understood her without the need for many words. Her gaze shifted to Neva, her sweet, worried daughter, and she gently reached out to her as well, holding them both close. "There are so many children out there, not as fortunate as we are. Just waiting for a single adult to reach out and change everything," Moriel said softly, her tone tinged with sadness, especially for Neva's sake. Neva glanced at Adyr, almost instinctively. He had once been one of those children. And every day, she was grateful he was now her brother. That was why she couldn't bring herself to argue anymore. All that remained was a simple, heartfelt request. Just make sure they're safe, and you too. After lifting the weight off her shoulders and receiving her children's quiet support, Moriel stayed with them a little longer. They talked, laughed, and enjoyed each other's company for hours. Eventually, as the night wore on, everyone retreated to their rooms. STF, Adyr murmured as he lay in bed. Victor's offer echoed in his mind. If he joined this new division and gained an identity like the STF, the potential advantages were clear. He weighed the possibilities in silence and eventually drifted off to sleep, those thoughts still circling in his head. When morning came, Adyr got up and followed his usual routine. He watched the sunrise for a few quiet minutes, did some light exercise, spent a bit of time in the bathroom, then went downstairs to prepare breakfast for his family. He brewed tea for them, made himself a bitter coffee, and returned to his room. Opening his laptop, he browsed through social media and forums to check for any new information about the game. Although the game was still trending and riding the hype, there wasn't much he could use. No one had mentioned anything about genetic mutations either. For a moment, Adyr found himself wondering if the government was actively suppressing that information. The only notable update he came across was that production and sales of game helmets had been halted. Apparently, helmets of players who died in-game had also ceased functioning entirely, and refunds were being offered to those who requested them. There was even an official statement from the city manager, openly apologizing for the technical issues and admitting they had failed to meet the public's expectations. They're trying to kill the hype, Adyr speculated. The 12-city government, which had once played a major role in promoting the game's success, now appeared determined to declare it a failure and shut it down completely. Chapter 22. Something Unholy. After shutting his laptop and changing clothes, Adyr headed downstairs and found Moriel and Neva already at the breakfast table. He wished Moriel a safe trip and stepped out of the house. The world was still the same, as bleak as ever. Sickly yellow clouds hung heavy in the sky, dimming the sun before it could properly reach the ground. The air was thick, dry, and oppressive. Compared to the clean, peaceful atmosphere of the game world, this reality felt dull and drained. And yet, in its own way, it had a certain beauty. One shaped by decay and survival. After improving his physique stat, Adyr no longer needed a mask or goggles to endure the air. But he still wore them, less out of necessity, more to avoid questions he didn't feel like answering. As the shuttle pulled in beside the curb, he stepped aboard without a word. All the usual faces were there, except one. Anne was missing. Adyr simply smiled at the absence and completed the ride in silence. The university zone was noticeably more crowded than the day before. Clearly, after their brief dive into the game, students were beginning to return to their regular routines. Not all of them, though. Victor was nowhere to be seen. He was probably already neck-deep in his father's latest project. Still, there were familiar faces in the crowd. As Adyr walked down the corridor toward his first class, he spotted a familiar figure, Cole, the school's notorious bully, and the same guy who'd busted his lip just a few days ago. But something about him was off. Flanked by his usual cronies, Cole walked right past Adyr without a word. No snide remark. Not even a glance. One of his arms was in a full cast, and his lip looked freshly split. Adyr didn't say anything either. Ever since he started playing the game, that constant itch for violence, the bloodlust, had dulled. He wasn't chasing conflict anymore. Then, just ahead of the classroom, he saw her. Her hair, a deep shade of midnight purple, spilled down to her waist, smooth and velvety, like twilight suspended between day and night. Her eyes matched it perfectly, soft, distant, and far too quiet. Puppy eyes, but heavy, like they'd seen more than they should have. Her pale face held no expression, as if lost in thoughts too far away to reach. And yet, there was something in that silence, an unspoken fragility, that stirred an instinct deep in your bones. The kind of face that made you want to shield her. Without a word. Without a reason. Selena White. She stood just a bit taller than him, her black and white uniform fitting as if tailored precisely for her. Every line and fold seemed to mirror her poise. She remained still, yet carried an effortless grace. Students passing by stole glances. Some even turned their heads, forgetting to watch their step, tripping in the process just for a second look at the most admired girl on campus. As Adyr approached, Selena glanced up, and for a fleeting moment, a small smile curved her lips. Rare, but unmistakably genuine. Selena, Adyr greeted, offering his own subtle smile. Didn't expect to see you here. They rarely had classes together. Normally, around this time, she was supposed to be across the campus. I'm waiting for the teacher, she said, avoiding his gaze as her fingers instinctively reached for her hair, a familiar nervous habit. A brief silence followed. When it became clear Adyr wasn't going to speak again, she glanced back at him and asked, "Did you get the gift I sent?" "Yeah. Thanks," Adyr said. "The cake, especially. My sister loved it." Selena's smile stayed, but something in her tone shifted. "I see." Adyr's eyes drifted to her right hand. The knuckles were slightly bruised and red. His thoughts immediately returned to Cole. How strangely quiet he'd been, how wrecked his face had looked. He sighed inwardly but kept his face unreadable. He said nothing. Selena lingered, as if she had something more to say but couldn't quite bring herself to voice it. As the silence stretched too long, turning faintly awkward, she finally spoke. I should get going," she murmured, barely meeting his eyes. "My class is starting." She hesitated for a second, then turned and walked away, quiet as ever, like she'd never been there at all. After watching Selena's frame disappear down the hallway, Adyr finally stepped into the classroom. Nothing on the schedule today particularly interested him. His mind was elsewhere, still tangled in thoughts of the game and the strange, unsettling implications it carried. Especially the parallels between game stats and genetic mutation. He could already estimate the capabilities of second-generation mutants to some extent. Most students at the university, especially those like Victor or Selena who had undergone advanced procedures, likely possessed bodies stronger than what his current physique stat of 10 could offer. As for STF operatives, they were on another level entirely. Adyr had never seen one demonstrate their strength in person, but the occasional leaked footage online was enough. Judging by that, he figured it would take at least a physique stat of 40, maybe more, to reach their baseline. The first generation, though, he didn't even bother making comparisons. Their mutations were raw, unpredictable. Some suffered from deformities and short lifespans due to unstable genetics. Others, however, were said to be stronger and more durable than any STF member. Living weapons born from chaos. And those were the ones that made the world outside the city walls truly dangerous. There had been rumors, stories of first-gens launching devastating attacks on entire cities. Acts of terrorism so severe even government forces couldn't bring them down. Entire task forces lost in operations that yielded nothing but body bags and classified reports. Let's hope Moriel doesn't run into one of them, Adyr thought, and then let the professor's voice from the lecture platform seep in, just enough to scatter the rest. Like anyone, Adyr's life had its ups and downs, but compared to his previous one, things were going well. Stable. Controlled. And that control had a name: family. He'd already lost one. So brutal, so scarring. It had breathed life into the monster he now kept locked inside. If even one more member of his family were taken from him, the balance would tip, and he wasn't sure there'd be anything left strong enough to hold it back. And now, with mutation burning in his blood, if he ever lost control, truly lost it, he wouldn't wonder what he might become. He already knew. Something inhuman. Something unholy. Chapter 23. He saw everything. When Adyr got home, he noticed the table was already set. Dinner was waiting, fresh and warm, and unlike most days, there were 2 plates instead of 1. Neva sat quietly, hands in her lap, as if she had been waiting for a while. Normally, she would have eaten by now and gone back to her routine before the nightly blackout. The change caught him off guard. "Neva," he said, slipping off his shoes. "What's going on?" His sister looked more distant than usual, her eyes quieter, her posture more withdrawn. "Today, I wanted to have dinner with you," she said, forcing a small smile. It was obvious something was weighing on her. Her mother was heading out on a dangerous mission. It was only natural she'd be uneasy. Adyr gave her a soft, understanding smile. "All right. Just let me wash up and change," he said, then went upstairs. He didn't take long. He didn't want to keep her waiting. The two ate in silence. It was too quiet, too heavy. Even Adyr couldn't think of anything to say to lift her mood. It was something she needed to work through on her own. Eventually, Neva broke the silence. "What if something happens to her?" she asked, her voice trembling, eyes beginning to redden. Adyr sighed, lowering the fork halfway to his mouth. He reached across the table, gently taking her slightly shaking hand. "Nothing will happen," he said calmly. "She said she'd be with the STF, remember? I'm sure they won't let anything touch her." "But—" Neva opened her mouth again, then closed it, afraid of her own thoughts. After a pause, she finally whispered, "I've read some really scary things on the forums. What if they run into something even they can't handle?" "Ah, that damned internet." Adyr gave a small, reassuring smile. "If something like that happens," he said, "then I'll go there myself, and even if I have to burn the entire place to the ground, I'll make sure she comes back safe." Hearing the words, Neva raised her head and looked her brother in the eyes. She knew he was saying it to lift her mood, that he couldn't possibly be serious, yet for some reason, she found it comforting. She let out a small laugh. "No, you can't burn the whole place down. There are still innocent people, remember? Just kicking a few bad guys' asses should be enough," she said, half joking, half trying to boost the pride of a brother who wasn't even a mutant. Adyr chuckled and gave a slight nod, turning back to his food. "Noted. I'll keep your advice in mind." Though still in a low mood, Neva looked noticeably better as they kept talking through dinner. Afterwards, they did the dishes and finished up the rest of the chores together, side by side, something neither of them mentioned, but both quietly appreciated. Once everything was done, Adyr headed to his room. It was time to check how things were going inside the game. When he came to his senses, the first thing he noticed was the lingering scent of stew, the same hearty mix of meat and vegetables he'd cooked the day before. His eyes opened slowly, instinctively searching for Vaishya, but the carriage was empty. No trace of her. No sign of the dawn raven either. Frowning, he stepped outside. It was night, but not completely dark. That strange moon still hung in the sky, resembling a sun, yet glowing in shifting shades of black and white, casting just enough light to see by. He looked around, and not far ahead, a glint of gold caught his eye, Vaishya's long, flowing hair glowing faintly under the strange sky. She was crouched in front of a tree, her small frame still, eyes locked on something. Adyr approached, and when he saw what she was staring at, he couldn't help but laugh quietly. There, tied to the tree by its wings and its beak bound shut, was the dawn raven. Its feathers shimmered in the ghostlight, almost radiant, yet none of that brilliance could hide how pitiful it looked. Vaishya stared at it. The raven stared back. The two of them looked like they were locked in a silent staring contest. Adyr stepped closer, voice low and casual. "You seem better today." At the sudden voice behind her, Vaishya flinched like a startled cat, quickly turning around. But the moment she saw it was Adyr, the fear and tension in her eyes melted away. "Yes, thanks to you," she said quickly, genuinely. Then she noticed Adyr glancing at the dawn raven and quickly explained, "It looked kind of suspicious, so I took it outside and tied it up here." Clearly, she'd been worried it might try something while Adyr was asleep, and decided it was safer to keep it under watch out here. Adyr appreciated it silently. Not only had she been brave enough to deal with a creature terrifying enough to haunt her nightmares, she was also out here, forcing her fragile body to endure the cold. "Thanks for keeping an eye on it," he said gently. "But I'm awake now. Go back inside and get some rest. It's cold out here." He could clearly see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had just returned from death's door, and was already naive enough to knock on it again. "Yes," she said obediently, and headed back into the carriage. Right before stepping inside, a faint blush crept onto her pale face. She almost turned around to ask if he'd been the one to change her clothes, even her underwear, but stopped herself. The answer was obvious. After Vaishya stepped inside and pulled the canvas flap shut behind her, Adyr walked over to the dawn raven. He crouched down, met its gaze, and ran a hand over its head. Doesn't matter the world. People always fear what they don't understand. Her. Then he unfastened the rope from the tree, picked up the raven, and made his way back to the carriage. After returning, Adyr set the raven down in a corner and walked over to Vaishya. He reached out and touched her forehead. She flinched at the sudden gesture, but didn't pull away. Your fever's there, but mild. That's good, he murmured, eyes scanning the deep flush across her face. Blood flows stabilizing. Time to change your bandages. Vaishya flinched at his words. For a moment, unsure how to address him, and haunted by flickers of memory, she spoke with a strained voice. Maybe I can do it myself. Adyr glanced at her, then at the bandages wrapped around her chest, his expression shifting at the unexpected request. He understood her concern. I'll shut my eyes and do my best not to touch anything I shouldn't, he said with a faint smile. It was the only reassurance he could offer. Good sir. You've probably already seen everything you shouldn't. Anyway. Vaishya thought with quiet helplessness. Chapter 24. Experimenting with the stats. After helping Vaishya change her bandages, she collapsed onto the bedding and slipped into sleep almost instantly. Clearly, the process had drained more of her mental energy than physical. Adyr let her rest. He had questions for her, but none were urgent, and he had other things to take care of first. He stepped outside, rekindled the fire, and used what little he had to prepare something that might ease her digestion. Then, he took a quick survey of the area, scanning the forest's edge. The surroundings were quiet, remote, and rarely traveled, by the look of it. Still, he wanted to be sure it was safe. Only after he was satisfied did he return to the carriage. He picked up the dawn raven, gave Vaishya one last glance to confirm she was still sleeping, and headed for the cave. There were still plenty of skeletons inside, and each one held a purple crystal, not something he was willing to leave behind. As he made his way deeper into the cave, he decided to test his stats. He still had 5 unused stat points, and he would spend them for this experiment. A name, Adyr. A race, human. Path, Primora. Evolution step, 0. Physique, 10. Will, 3. Resilience, 3. Sense, 2. Energy, 0.318. Registered talents, 3/5. Sparks, complete your first evolution to unlock. Sanctuary, complete your first evolution to unlock. Free stat points, 5. He first assigned 1 stat point to resilience, and waited, trying to feel its effects. But unlike the times he had increased physique, there wasn't much to notice, just a faint tingling across his body. He then recalled something he'd read on the forums. Every player was granted only 1 stat tied to the path they chose. According to those players, a resilience was linked to the nether path, a path said to embody both destruction and rebirth. Also, from the name alone, he assumed it was a defense-oriented stat, but without more first-hand experience, it was still too early to draw any definitive conclusions. Next, he moved on to will and assigned a point to it. Unlike before, the effect was immediate. His body warmed up in an instant, and it felt as if something was coursing through him at incredible speed. It was like his entire system had been asleep until now, and had just woken up, ready to move. But the change wasn't limited to his body. His mind, too, felt sharper, more focused. As he continued walking, he began to notice subtle movements, minor shifts in his posture and balance that he would have normally overlooked. With each step, it felt like his body was learning, adjusting, refining itself. Almost as if he were rewriting his own programming in real time. Will was tied to the Ignis path, which he recalled was said to represent all forms of movement. Now, that made perfect sense. The stat increase hadn't just activated his body, it had also sharpened his perception of motion itself. Adyr thought for a moment, and if this were a traditional game, he figured, will would likely cover what most systems split into agility and dexterity stats. Next, and last, he increased his sense stat, the one tied to the ether path, said to represent all things spiritual. As the point settled, Adyr came to an abrupt halt inside the cave. He heard. It was as if the world around him had erupted into noise. He could hear the faint rustling of air flowing through narrow cracks in the stone, the soft drip of water echoing from deep within, and the low, steady beat of his own heart, even the silence itself. Suddenly, the silence wasn't so silent anymore. But that was only the beginning. He saw. It dawned on him. Until now, he had only been looking. Now, he was truly seeing. A man who had always prided himself on observing the smallest details, drawing meaning from the subtlest signs, now felt as if those very details were stepping forward, offering up their stories without being asked. His eyes dropped to the damp black soil beneath his feet. He studied the footprints pressed into the mud until they shifted. In his mind's eye, they morphed into skeletal figures, marching across the cave floor. Dozens, then hundreds. It struck him. He was no longer the one extracting stories from the traces. The traces were telling the stories themselves. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, but not as overwhelming as what came next. And then, he felt. Something cold brushed against his spine. Not wind, but instinct. He turned sharply, staring into the dark behind him. Nothing there. Still, his muscles tightened. That suffocating sense of being watched wrapped around him like a second skin. If he had ever known what fear felt like, his body might have started to tremble right then. So much input, so many signals, more than any sane mind should be able to handle. He took a few steady breaths, letting his body adjust to the new sensations before continuing forward. Realizing that each stat brought its own unique, almost miraculous transformation had only fueled his curiosity and sharpened his focus. He was ready now. Ready to crush the skulls of those skeletal husks and claim the precious energy crystals hidden within. Asterisk. Author note: if anyone wants to go back to Chapter 5 to reread the path descriptions, no need. I'm pasting them here. Astra. One of the 4 main paths, created by the god Astrael. He shaped the first solid form from the chaos, giving structure to the formless. It represents everything physical. Ether. One of the 4 main paths, created by the goddess Aetheris. She gave inner depth to all that exists, shaping the unseen essence within the seen. It represents everything spiritual. Ignis. One of the 4 main paths, created by the god Ignivar. He sparked the first motion within creation, awakening both flesh and soul. It represents every movement. Nether. One of the 4 main paths, created by the goddess Nethra. As the counterforce to creation, she began the cycle of decay, undoing form so that renewal may begin. It represents every destruction and rebirth. Primora. The One. They longed to exist, and I let them be. Asterisk. And since you're here, thanks a lot for sticking around this far. Really means a lot to me. Any kind of support helps more than you think. You know the deal. Chapter 25. Killing the Clouds. Dawn Raven in one hand, broken spear in the other, Adyr finally reached the skeleton chamber. He hadn't seen a single one on the way. It seemed they had all gathered here. With no master left to serve, they stood in eerie stillness, waiting without purpose. But the moment they saw Adyr and the master they once served held in his hands, they stirred. Their jaws snapped in uneven rhythm, bone clacking against bone with sharp, erratic clicks. Click, clack, click, clack. The silence broke, replaced by the unsettling chorus of chattering skulls. But they didn't advance. They just stood there. And that was exactly how Adyr preferred it. He stepped toward the nearest skeleton and, without hesitation, drove the rusted tip of his spear straight through its skull. The bone cracked with a dry snap, and the skeleton collapsed without resistance. None of the others reacted. They simply kept clattering their jaws, empty and mechanical, completely mindless. But unlike them, something did react. The Dawn Raven suddenly began to stir, restless and twitching in his hand. Oh, they're your friends. Adyr asked, genuinely curious. Sorry, he added, driving the spear through another skull. But they're far too vulnerable to be friends. He wasn't in the mood to empathize with the raven. It was, after all, the one responsible for turning them into mindless skeletons in the first place. Tuning out its protests, he focused on the task at hand. One precise strike after another, he crushed each skull with minimal effort, conserving both time and stamina. After an hour and a half of relentless grinding, he finally stopped and looked around. The chamber was a bone-littered graveyard, filled with collapsed skeletons and shattered skulls. The energy crystals were already harvested. He had counted 163 in total. He consumed 153 of them and pocketed the remaining 10, thinking they might serve another purpose later. The ones he used gave him a neat 15.3 boost to his energy. He then opened his status panel to check the final state. Physique, 10. Will, 4. Resilience, 4. Sense, 3. Energy, 15.6, 21. Free stat points, 2. It's enough to register another level 2 talent, but not nearly enough for an evolution, Adyr assessed. The energy he had gained in such a short time wasn't small, but it wasn't sufficient either, especially with other concerns weighing on him. For one, were energy crystals always this easy to find? This skeleton chamber might be a rare farming spot. And since he still lacked a proper understanding of this world, he had to consider the possibility that opportunities like this wouldn't come often. Now that there were no threats left, he took a moment to look around. The cave had clearly been used in the past. There might have been hidden passages or forgotten valuables. With no reason to rush, it was worth checking. Using his recently improved sense stat, he began a careful search. Most of what he found was worthless. Bone dust, rust, and broken debris. Eventually, he came across a few swords, shields, and pieces of armor. Judging by their make, they likely belonged to the Vaishya's guards. None of it suited his fighting style. He had little experience with swords, and the armor pieces were too small to wear. Still, not wanting to leave empty-handed, he gathered what he could carry. Even if he couldn't use them, they might be worth something later. And just like that, he left the cave behind. A strange sense of closure settled in, marking the end of the first arc of his journey in this world. It left him with a quiet, satisfying calm. It was still midnight outside. The monochrome sun cast its dim, unnatural glow across the land, bathing the world in an eerie, almost enchanting light. He returned to the carriage. Vaishya was still asleep. Without waking her, he quietly stowed the items he had collected into a corner and stepped back outside. Not far from the carriage, he spotted the two horses. They hadn't wandered off, still grazing silently in the distance. Up close, their beauty caught him off guard once again. He couldn't help but stare, momentarily mesmerized. Their deep midnight blue coats shimmered under the dark light, marked with pale patterns that looked like scattered stars. In the stillness of the night, they looked like living verses from a forgotten poem. He approached slowly, careful not to startle them. Their behavior might differ from horses he knew, so he kept his movements controlled. Once close enough, he didn't reach out immediately. Instead, he picked up a bit of grass and offered it, building trust first. One of them quickly noticed, its gaze shifting to him and the offering in his hand. Adyr raised his hand and gently stroked its mane, which felt like strands of black silk. Surprisingly social, they responded better than expected. It was almost laughable how easily he had earned their trust. I wonder if they have energy crystals in their skulls. He thought for a moment. Not that he intended to check. He needed them alive to pull the carriage. After checking their harnesses and reins to make sure everything was in working order, he felt the hunger creeping in. He picked at the meal he had left warming over the dying fire, ate just enough to take the edge off, then climbed into the carriage and logged out. Adyr, as always, left the game helmet plugged in and ready. He picked up the candle from the table and stepped out of his room. Downstairs, the living room was pitch dark. Neva was nowhere to be seen. He went back upstairs to check her room and found her asleep, alone, in the large bed she normally shared with their mother. The way she curled into herself, her stillness. It looked like the weight on her mind was dragging her into something deeper than sleep. Quietly, he closed the door. Right now, sleep was the best thing for her. A break from reality. A way to escape whatever was gnawing at her mind. He headed back downstairs, put on his shoes, and stepped outside. After each session in the game, he had a habit of doing a short workout to keep his strength in check. This time, he decided to do it outside. He wasn't wearing goggles or a mask. He took a deep breath of the contaminated air. Normally, even with his physique stat at 10, the air left a harsh sting in his throat and lungs. But now, he felt nothing. The first explanation that came to mind was the influence of his resilience stat. The streets were completely silent. Not a soul in sight. The sky above was buried beneath thick clouds, sealing away the moonlight before it could reach the ground. Adyr stood there for a while, his dark eyes fixed on the sky. The darkness above seemed to be in a silent standoff with the darkness inside. Killing the clouds, how satisfying would that be? He thought. A murder, carried out to release the moonlight from its prison. But did he have the power to do that? Not now. He said. Not yet. Chapter 26, A Small Favor. After his workout, Adyr returned to his room and allowed himself some well-earned sleep. When morning came, he broke from his usual routine. He woke Neva early, and together, they prepared and ate breakfast. Sleep was good for softening the mind, but overindulgence only led to deeper problems. As her brother, it was his responsibility to keep an eye on her, to make sure she didn't slip too far. Once they were done, he left for school. In this post-apocalyptic world, there were no holidays. As long as one's health allowed, life was meant to be in constant motion. Everyone worked every day. On the morning transport, Aydyr's absence was noticeable. But aside from Adyr, no one seemed to care. When he arrived on campus, he did something he rarely did. He decided to skip his first class. He noticed he'd been breaking his routines more often lately. But in a world that changed by the hour, adapting to that change wasn't something that bothered him. He crossed to a different part of the university and walked through the corridor until he found who he was looking for. Selena stood with a few of her admirers, chatting in her usual gentle tone, that soft and almost nurturing expression on her face. Her midnight purple hair framed her features in a way that made her seem both untouchable and present. The moment she noticed Adyr, surprise flickered in her eyes. She politely excused herself from the group and approached him quickly. "I didn't know you had a class over here today," she said with a rare, vulnerable smile, one that came purely from sincerity. "I don't. I came to see you," Adyr replied. He saw no point in dragging it out with small talk. "See me?" Selena blinked, caught off guard. Her cheeks colored. "I need a favor," he said, cutting to the point before her mind could wander further. This time, Selena didn't just look surprised. She was genuinely stunned. It was always him offering help, not the other way around. This was the first time Adyr had ever come to her with a direct request. "Just tell me," she said firmly. She wasn't going to let the moment pass. "My mother works at the city orphanage. Her name is Moriel. A short while ago, she left the city for an expedition. Do you know anything about it?" His voice was low but serious. Selena thought for a moment. Of course, she knew who Moriel was. There was no way she wouldn't. But she hadn't heard about the expedition. "I understand. Give me a minute. I'll tell my mother to cancel the expedition," she said, already reaching into her uniform pocket for the privileged use phone only people like her carried. Adyr stopped her. "That's not what I want." He couldn't bring himself to do that. Moriel had been genuinely excited about the trip, convinced it might change lives. Taking that from her would be nothing short of cruel. He spoke his true intention without delay. "I just want you to keep your ears open. If anything goes wrong, just inform me." He could have asked Victor, whose father was the Minister of Defense and who had control over the STF. But even Victor wouldn't be able to get past the classified layers of their operations. Selena, on the other hand, had direct access to Angel Wing's Foundation personnel. That made her far more valuable for this. Of course. Don't worry, she said, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Her voice was calm, her expression soft, but there was a firm resolve in her eyes. Thank you, Adyr said with a faint smile. No, thank you, Selena replied, averting her gaze. After everything you've done for me, just giving me a chance to return even a fraction of it means a lot. Adyr said nothing at first. He simply smiled. Then, after a moment, he added, actually, there's one more thing. Selena lifted her head, patiently waiting for what he'd say next. Are you considering joining the new third-generation mutant division? Adyr asked, knowing full well that someone like her would have already heard about it. He didn't even need to ask if she was playing the game. With his enhanced sense stat, it was clear the moment he saw her. Her movements had become sharper, more precise. Each step she took seemed more effortless than the last. From that alone, he could tell she had received will as her stat, which meant her chosen path was Ignis. Selena didn't seem surprised by his question. As if it were only natural, she answered, I haven't decided yet. She looked at him for a moment longer, waiting, clearly curious about his own choice. But she didn't ask directly. After a pause, Adyr spoke. There's a guy in my scholarship group. His name is Adyr. Do you know him? Adyr. Selena furrowed her brows for a second before the name clicked. Yes. That big guy, right? He nodded. I want you to make sure he gets into the new division. It was also something he could have asked Victor to handle, probably with better results. But since he was already here, it made sense to take care of it now. And Selena could handle it just fine. Sure, she said with a smile. She didn't care how someone like Adyr got his hands on a game helmet or whether he had what it took to survive the game. What mattered was simple, Adyr had asked. And when he did, it carried more weight than a signed contract with the government. Thank you, he said again. Selena replied with a soft smile and a nod. As soon as Adyr walked away, she pulled out her phone and dialed a saved number. It rang only once before the call connected. Her tone shifted immediately, calm replaced by tension, warmth by urgency. Mom, we need to talk. After speaking with Selena and resolving the most urgent concerns, Adyr returned to his classes with a clearer head. The weight that had been pressing down on him all morning had eased, allowing him to move through the rest of his day without distraction. He intended to tell Neva about it later. Letting her know that their mother's situation was being monitored would help settle her nerves. Just imagining the relief it might bring her made things feel a little lighter for him, too. The tension at home and the feeling of being at the mercy of forces beyond his control had always worn on him. But now, with things temporarily under control, he could finally push those thoughts aside and turn his full focus back to the game and himself. Chapter 27. An offer. A car crept toward a small house, its headlights cutting through a street barely touched by the weak, flickering glow of a few scattered lamps. The sound of the car drew curious eyes. A few people peeked through their windows, and one or two even stepped outside, quietly inspecting the unfamiliar vehicle. It wasn't often something like this showed up around here. But still, no one dared to approach or ask questions. The driver's door opened first. A man stepped out quickly and moved to open the rear passenger door. Out stepped Selena White. Her hair, tied into a high ponytail, shimmered a striking shade of violet under the night lights. She wore a sharp, professional outfit, something between a government uniform and a business suit, that made her look every bit like a successful executive. Is this the place? She asked the dark-haired assistant who had just exited from the other side. Yes, miss, the woman replied, double-checking her notes before answering with confidence. You stay here, Selena said calmly, then began walking toward the house at a steady pace. Her assistant and driver looked hesitant, but they followed the order, staying alert and prepared for whatever might come. Selena stopped in front of the door. There was no bell, so she knocked on the door. After a few long seconds, the door opened. A massive figure wearing a cooking apron stood in the doorway. It was Adyr. His deep green eyes locked onto the unexpected visitor with confusion. Who are you? He asked, clearly not recognizing her at first. Then a flicker of realization crossed his face. "Why are you here?" Selena ignored the lack of manners. She understood. A surprise visitor at this hour would catch anyone off guard. "Do you have a moment?" "I came to talk," she said politely. "About the game you've been playing." Aaron's confusion deepened. "You're the one who sent the helmet." "No, I wasn't," she answered with the same calmness. "But if you'll invite me in, it would be easier to explain." He hesitated, suspicious, but eventually stepped aside. Selena stepped in and, as expected of someone familiar with lower-income households, removed her shoes before entering further. Her gaze immediately shifted to the center of the tidy, well-kept room, where a medical bed sat surrounded by hospital-grade equipment. Lying there was a frail young girl. "Is she your sister?" Selena asked softly. She didn't need confirmation. She hadn't researched Aaron's life out of respect for Adyr, but from her looks, the way the room was arranged, and the care evident in every detail, it was easy to figure out. She trusted her instincts and her trained eye for reading a situation. Her observation skills were sharp, and it didn't take much to see how long the girl had been in this condition or how much Aaron had sacrificed to care for her. After all, she had learned from the best. "Yes," Aaron said. He was about to tell her not to get any closer, but it was already too late. "Hello. I'm Selena, a friend of your brother," she said softly, stepping up to the bedside. She met the girl's eyes, green like Aaron's, but softer, lighter, and smiled. "You have beautiful eyes." Myra tensed at first, unused to strangers. But the warmth in Selena's voice and the calm in her expression quickly put her at ease. The unexpected compliment made her eyes brighten, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. Seeing his sister smile made Aaron exhale quietly, the tension in his shoulders fading just slightly. "You said you're here about the game, right?" He wasn't entirely surprised. He had expected someone to come eventually. What surprised him was who it was. He'd imagined a stiff government official in a black suit, not someone like her. He had already figured out the game wasn't normal. The helmet had arrived without warning, in an unmarked package. At first, he had ignored it. Between his responsibilities and his sister's condition, he simply didn't have time. But one day, curiosity won out. He tried it. As he played, and more importantly, as his stats increased, he started noticing physical changes in the real world. That alone told him everything he needed to know. He hated himself for this. If he had known the game truly had the power to trigger genetic mutations, he would have given it to his sister instead. But it was too late. The helmet had already synced with his brain patterns, so she couldn't use it anymore. Later, he tried to buy another game helmet, but aside from the price being far beyond his reach, production and sales had already been completely shut down. "Yes," Selena said, still watching Myra gently before turning back to him. "I came to make you an offer." "An offer?" Aaron asked, his voice hardening. "I'm assuming you've figured out the game's connection to genetic mutation," Selena said. When Aaron gave a small nod, she continued. "In a few days, the government will be launching an active defense and assault unit made up of third-generation mutants. As you can guess, third generation refers to those who've played the game and survived, and continue to play. I want to invite you to join this unit." She met his eyes as she finished. Seeing a flicker of hesitation, she quickly added, "Every member of the division will be granted official status by the state. Enough for them and their families to be eligible for approvals of genetic mutations." Hearing this, Aaron's eyes widened in disbelief. Whatever hesitation he had vanished in an instant. This was a chance he would give his life for. After leaving the house, Selena stood outside for a while, silent and still. So this was his reason, she thought, recalling the brightness in Myra's eyes, light filled with quiet sorrow. She had never openly questioned Adyr's motives, but the reason he chose to help this person lingered at the back of her mind. Now that she had seen it for herself, the truth sank in quietly, and she could only exhale, as if releasing a weight she didn't know she was carrying. It reminded her of how Adyr had first entered her life. How he had helped her kill the monster that wore the face of her father. A man who holds life and death in his hands. So casually, so easily, Selena whispered, lifting her gaze to the sky. Above, the moonlight glowed faintly, trapped behind thick, motionless clouds. Selena couldn't help but wonder to herself, is it possible to kill the dark clouds to free the moonlight? She didn't dwell on the answer. Instead, a bright smile spread across her face. Because she already knew. Those clouds had already died once. And when they did, they set her free. Chapter 28. Evolution. After coming back home, Adyr and Neva shared a quiet, heartfelt dinner as brother and sister. During the meal, he told her about his conversation with Selena and the promise she had made. Neva seemed visibly relieved after hearing it. Strangely enough, Selena's words seemed to bring her more comfort than anything the STF could offer. Once dinner and the usual chores were out of the way, Adyr returned to his room, unplugged the game helmet, and logged in. "What are you doing?" When Adyr opened his eyes, he saw Vaish's face close to his, her large, icy-blue eyes staring straight at him. "You've been sleeping for a long time," she said, pulling back slightly to give him space. Her expression looked genuinely concerned. "Is something wrong?" Adyr wasn't surprised. Based on his experience, time in the game moved at the same pace as the real world. Since he only spent about 3 hours per day inside the game, Vaishya must have thought he was sleeping the other 21. "I'm fine. Just busy in the other world," Adyr replied with a small chuckle. Out of the corner of his eye, he checked on the dawn raven, still resting silently in the corner. "The other world?" Vaishya repeated, clearly startled. She didn't understand what he meant. "Just kidding," he said quickly, seeing her reaction. "It's a curse. Makes me tired, so I sleep all day." He figured this lie would be easier to believe than the truth. Her tense expression softened slightly, though she still looked worried. "I'm sorry. Is there anything I can do?" Clearly, curses weren't unheard of in this world, and Vaishya had accepted it without question. "I'll manage. But thanks for asking," Adyr said. Then he added, "Have you eaten?" He noticed the pot from yesterday's meal was completely empty. He also felt hungry, more than usual. Maybe it was the effect of his increased stats, but the portions he was used to back home no longer felt like enough. "Sorry," Vaishya muttered, lowering her head. She had finished the rest while he was gone, bored and with nothing else to do. "It's fine. I'll cook something new," Adyr said, laughing at how timid she looked. She wasn't the same woman he had met back in prison. That confident, self-assured presence had faded. Now she seemed hesitant and unsure of herself, speaking less and carrying herself like a burden. "If you're feeling up to it, you can help me," Adyr said as he stepped out of the carriage. "Yes," Vaishya answered quickly, following behind. She looked eager to be useful again, clearly tired of lying around all day while Adyr handled everything. Together, they gathered what they needed, built a small fire, and began preparing the meal. Noticing that Vaishya's energy had started to return, Adyr took the opportunity to ask a few questions that had been on his mind. "What does practitioner mean?" he asked while peeling a vegetable that looked like a potato, though he wasn't entirely sure what it was. It tasted like one, at least. "Isn't this just a potato?" He couldn't help but wonder. Vaishya, who was clumsily peeling something that looked like a cucumber but was oddly blue, blinked at the sudden question. "You don't know?" she asked, glancing at him. It sounded absurd. A practitioner asking what a practitioner was? "I'm not too sure. I'm just a beginner, you see. I only became one recently," Adyr said, raising his hand slightly, as if to say, "Don't look at me like that. You're not from the Valari kingdom, are you?" Vaishya narrowed her eyes. Adyr was far taller than anyone she had ever seen, and his clothes and manner of speaking were all different. He probably came from some secluded village hidden in the mountains. "Yeah," Adyr replied, dodging the details. Vaishya didn't press further. She simply answered, "Practitioner is just what we call entities like you." Her eyes shifted away as she spoke, but Adyr noticed the flicker in her gaze. There was reverence in it. Some races call them pathfinders. Others say rule-benders. But the meaning is always the same. They're the only ones born with the ability to use sparks, she explained. At the end of her sentence, she glanced at Adyr and noticed he was quietly peeling his vegetables, showing no reaction. She went on. They can also absorb the world's energy into their bodies. Not just to use sparks, but to strengthen themselves, physically and spiritually. As Adyr listened, he realized the way Vaishya described practitioners fit him, and likely the other players as well. He paused for a moment and asked, "How many practitioners are there in your kingdom?" Vaishya stared into the fire for a few seconds, her expression dimming. "There were 11 3 years ago," she said quietly. "Now only 4 remain. 7 died over the years while protecting the kingdom. And even 5 of them were in their 3rd stage evolution." "From what?" Adyr stopped what he was doing, genuinely curious. Vaishya didn't keep him waiting. "It's a rank 4 spark. It first appeared near the kingdom's borders 3 years ago, and since then, it's been attacking every 6 months. "What the fuck?" Adyr cursed inwardly, his eyes instinctively drifting to the harmless-looking dawn raven resting nearby. Is the gap between rank 1 and rank 4 really that massive? He wondered. To threaten the safety of an entire kingdom, and kill 7 of its strongest warriors in the process, that level of power was hard to imagine. Compared to that, his rank 1 raven suddenly felt like a toy. While Adyr was deep in thought, mentally trying to piece together a power hierarchy, Vaishya's voice broke the silence. "You still haven't completed your first evolution step, right?" This time, it was her turn to ask a question that had clearly been on her mind. It wasn't hard to tell that Adyr knew almost nothing about what it meant to be a practitioner. No one had taught him anything, and she could see it clearly now. "No," Adyr replied. He was actually glad she had brought it up without him asking. "Do you know how I'm supposed to do that?" Vaishya shrugged slightly. "Only a practitioner can truly know when it's time," she said. "But what I do know is that for each evolution step, you have to merge with a spark of the appropriate rank. Since this would be your first step, you need to bond with a rank 1 spark to complete it." She paused before continuing. "But there's something important you should know. With each evolution, you inherit 1 physical trait and 1 passive innate talent from the spark you merge with. That's why choosing the right one is important." Everything Vaishya shared was common knowledge in her kingdom. These were the kinds of things regularly mentioned in church sermons when she attended with her family. Beyond that, most of what she knew about practitioners came from books. After taking it all in, Adyr glanced over at the dawn raven resting quietly beside him and asked, "What would happen if I evolved with that one?" It was a question he was really curious about. Chapter 29, New Division. Vaishya looked at the creature. She thought for a moment before answering, "I'm not completely sure, but judging by its physical traits, you'd probably gain its wings." Adyr also examined the dawn raven. If he had to name its most striking physical trait, it would be the bright, eye-catching white feathers. What if I gain those feathers? Wouldn't that just make me a chicken? He thought, mildly amused. Vaishya continued, "As for the innate talent." She paused, a faint tremble running through her as the memory of the raven turning her guard into a skeleton flashed in her mind. The trauma was still there, buried but not forgotten. Her voice shook slightly as she continued. "From what I understand, its power seems tied to life energy, or something like that. If you inherited this ability, it would probably let you control life force in some way. But it wouldn't be strong enough to raise the dead like it did. The power you receive would be diluted. Maybe just enough to heal yourself or others." "Is that so?" Adyr looked somewhat pleased with the answer. Gaining wings and a healing ability didn't sound like a bad deal. Dawn Raven didn't seem like such a bad choice for his evolution after all. He asked a few more questions, but Vaishya advised him not to rush the decision. She suggested waiting until they reached the kingdom, where he could speak with other practitioners first. Even a rank 1 spark wasn't easy to catch, she explained. But with some luck, a practitioner in the kingdom might have one they'd be willing to part with. With this, Adyr learned another crucial piece of information. Sparks weren't just essential for evolution. They could also be captured and used even after evolving. Practitioners were able to wield their powers directly. That meant, just as Vaishya had said, other practitioners likely had additional sparks in their possession, ones they actively used in combat or daily life. While preparing the meal and later as they ate, Adyr kept the conversation going with Vaishya, slipping in questions between casual remarks. By the time they were done, he had learned a great deal and gained a clearer picture of this world, at least through her eyes. Afterwards, Vaishya went back to the carriage to rest. Adyr wandered through the forest for a while, hoping to stumble upon something useful or worth noting. But when he found nothing of value, he returned as well. He was completely done with this place and wanted to take the carriage and head back to the kingdom, but his current situation didn't allow for it. From what he had learned, the return trip would take about half a day without rest. However, Adyr's time in the game was limited. If they set off and the game helmet's battery died mid-journey, his body would lose consciousness, and Vaishya still wasn't well enough to drive the carriage on her own. On top of that, the road ahead might be more dangerous than where they were now. There was always a chance they could be attacked while he was offline. That left him with two possible options. Either Vaishya would recover enough to handle the carriage alone, which still carried the risk of bandits or wild beasts, or Adyr had to find a solution to extend his in-game time. Looks like it's time to talk to Victor, Adyr muttered to himself as he climbed into the carriage and logged out. The next day, Adyr skipped his first class again and stepped into a phone booth on campus, willing to pay 1 credit per minute to dial Victor's number. He could have called from home, but the landline charged twice as much, and given his financial situation, he couldn't afford that kind of waste. That last delivery fee, 45 credits, still lingered like a fresh wound. The call connected and rang a few times. Just as Adyr was about to hang up, thinking Victor was busy, the line picked up. "Who are you?" Victor's voice came through, sharp and suspicious. "Call this number back," Adyr said, then hung up without reacting to Victor's confused, "Wait, who are you?" He had no intention of burning credits by the minute. Victor had more than enough money for this kind of thing. Seconds later, the phone rang. Adyr picked up. "Hey, who the fuck are you, hanging up on me?" Victor's irritated voice barked through the receiver. "Relax, it's me, Adyr." "Adyr? Oh, damn. I thought some hot girl got my number and was trying to hit on me," Victor said, his tone shifting to amused laziness. "The only thing hitting you would be their boyfriend's punches, Victor," Adyr said with a dry chuckle. "Add spice to the fun, if you ask me," Victor laughed, then shifted to a more curious tone. "But you calling me? That's not normal. What's up?" "It's about the division you mentioned," Adyr replied. "So you decided to join? Dude, trust me, you won't regret it. The place already looks amazing. Not to brag, but I helped design most of it. Actually, screw it, I am bragging. Ha ha." Victor sounded clearly excited. "Yeah, I can already picture the urinals and sinks shaped like women's asses," Adyr muttered, exhaling slowly. "Wait, how the hell do you know that?" Victor asked, genuinely caught off guard. "You know what, don't answer that," Victor cut in quickly, clearly certain that whatever Adyr might say would bruise his ego. "Are you on campus? I can send someone to pick you up, give you a proper look at the place." Adyr thought it over for a moment. It wasn't a bad offer and definitely better than sitting through another boring class. "Sure. I'll wait at the bus stop," he said. Risking his scholarship was a concern, but if it came to that, he'd figure something out. After hanging up, he made his way to the bus stop. When he arrived, someone was already waiting for him. "Mr. Adyr." A large man in a black suit approached. Unlike Adyr, he wasn't wearing a mask or protective goggles. "Yes, that's me," Adyr replied. The man gave him a sharp, almost irritated look, sizing him up from head to toe before stepping aside and opening the passenger door of a large black SUV. "Please get in." Adyr smiled inwardly. The man looked torn between politeness and annoyance. Serving someone like him probably felt like an insult to his pride, but orders were orders. Without a word, Adyr stepped in and let the man shut the door behind him. Half an hour passed in silence before the driver finally spoke. "We've arrived." Adyr glanced out the window. One look at the newly built facility was enough to catch him off guard. They really went all in on this. Chapter 30. Murdering People. Nuclear war was devastating, no doubt about that. But it still led to a few things that ended up being useful to humanity. One of them was how quickly construction methods improved. People learned to build faster and smarter than ever before, and a clear example of that was standing right in front of Adyr. It was a skyscraper, standing over 150 meters tall and just as wide as it was high, which made it all the more astonishing. The exterior was clad entirely in matte black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. It didn't look like a building. It looked like a massive coffin stretching toward the sky. Adyr paused for a moment, wondering if a building this massive was really necessary. How many players were they planning to house in there? Anyway, he glanced back, but the suited man clearly had no intention of following. Taking the hint, Adyr turned and made his way toward the entrance alone. The interior was just as massive as the outside. On the right, a waiting lounge was outfitted with luxury leather seating and even an open buffet, clearly designed to impress. On the left, a garden stretched out like a small forest, complete with a pond, making Adyr question again who this level of extravagance was supposed to impress. The place wasn't empty. People were scattered throughout, sitting, walking, talking, but none of them looked ordinary. They tried to appear casual, but Adyr could tell. These weren't regular visitors. Assuming they were all mutants, he already had a sense of how tight the security was here. Without turning left or right, he headed straight for the large reception desk ahead. He could feel the stares on him. Measured, cautious, assessing. When he reached the desk, one of the three women behind it greeted him. She was sharply dressed, with short black hair and brown eyes, her smile polite but thinly veiled with disdain. "Hello, sir. Can I help you?" Wow. One of those moments. The face slap scenes from those web novels. Adyr smirked inwardly, the whole scenario already playing out in his mind. "I came to see a friend. His name is Victor," he said flatly, skipping the small talk. The receptionist froze for a brief moment at the name, though her smile didn't fade. "Can I have your name, if possible?" she asked. "Adyr," he replied, already knowing exactly how this would go. "Your surname?" Her polite tone dipped slightly. "No surname. Just Adyr." The smile finally vanished from her face. "This isn't a place you can just walk into," she said coldly. "Leave." Wow. That character shift was impressive. Adyr couldn't help but admire the performance. "Well, I'm afraid I can't leave. My friend's waiting for me. The least you can do is call him so he can come down and get me," Adyr said, keeping his tone calm and reasonable. In truth, everything had already started to unravel the moment Victor's driver dropped him off without escorting him inside. And even more so when Victor didn't bother to meet him at the entrance. That small oversight had set the stage for everything that would follow. Still, Adyr couldn't be too surprised. He knew Victor, careless, laid back, and completely lacking foresight. The kind of guy who probably assumed Adyr would just stroll in and somehow find him in the middle of a 50-story fortress. "If you don't leave now, the only thing I'll be calling is security," the woman said sharply, no longer bothering to hide her disdain. "People get angry too easily. They keep ignoring how easy dying really is." Adyr sighed quietly. There were two reasons he didn't act on what crossed his mind. One, he didn't want to kill anyone. Two, there were mutant guards around. The second reason was far more convincing. But there were plenty of ways to kill someone without actually taking their life. And Adyr had finally accepted that being reasonable was a waste of time. It was time to change tactics. He took a step closer and discreetly studied the woman's eyes. "What are you?" she began, but Adyr cut her off. "Mistline or Retinex?" The moment she heard the names, her body tensed, and she took a small step back. "Stop spitting nonsense," she snapped, but her voice had already lost its firmness. Adyr smiled. Those were the two most commonly used ocular drugs, and of course, they were illegal. Even in this much light, your pupils are still dilated. There's visible color fading, especially in the left eye. "So, Mistline, right?" he said, calm and collected, his smile never leaving his face. Her complexion turned ghostly pale. But Adyr had no intention of letting her off the hook. Judging by the discoloration and your eyes' lack of light response. What, 3 years? Maybe a bit more, hey? Must be hard, fighting addiction, he added, almost as if the last sentence weighed on him too. Stop it, the woman said, her voice trembling. She looked like she might collapse at any second. Adyr noticed the other 2 receptionists staring at them in shock and turned to address them. Oh, you didn't know? Right, of course you didn't. It's an illegal substance, after all. A receptionist, right here, in a facility where order and security are supposed to be at their highest, addicted to a banned drug. He clicked his tongue softly and shook his head, as if disappointed. The shift was instant. The 2 receptionists immediately panicked. In a place like this, even a receptionist position should have gone through strict screening. The only way an addict could have slipped through was with connections. And if there were connections involved, it wouldn't just be one person facing consequences. The entire department would be wiped out. Seeing the scene ripen for its final act, Adyr decided to close the curtain with one final performance. Don't worry, I'm not blaming you anymore, he said, his voice low and almost sympathetic. Anger's just one of the side effects. And with how much that drugs ruined your vision, it makes sense you didn't notice the uniform, Shelter City 9's only university. So naturally, you couldn't have known Victor Bates, who goes to the same university, is a friend of mine. And with the final words, the woman collapsed, her consciousness slipping away as her body hit the floor. The other 2 receptionists stood frozen, staring in horror. Not a single step forward. Not a single word. Because they knew exactly what was coming. An internal investigation would begin immediately, starting with the one who hired her and extending through the entire department. The charges would fall under terrorism-related breaches, since the drugs were known to originate from terrorist groups operating outside the city. And even if they somehow managed to clear their names by some impossibly narrow margin, the stain would stay. No company would ever hire them again. Faced with that reality, all they could do was watch in paralyzed silence. And Adyr watched them in return, smiling. He had just murdered a dozen people in front of an army of mutants, and somehow, it felt refreshing.